What's up, guys? This is Professor Velociraptor. Hope you guys have been enjoying the holiday season. And I've got another video for you all. And this is maybe the most excited I've been to record a video since maybe my JJK versus JoJo's villains video, which is a while back. And this one, I think the hype is for a pretty understandable reason. Well, actually, understandable for me. Maybe you guys don't know. But Black Clover and the Bleach are, in my opinion, two of the more fun verses to talk about when it comes to versus battles and hypotheticals. In addition, they also just happen to be two of my favorite anime, at least in the current moment. And not to mention, they both have like this, I guess, somewhat equivalent system where Black Clover has the Magic Knights and Bleach has the Gotei 13. And then at the top and pinnacle of each of their like respective groups, they have the captains for both, who represent like the strongest, I guess, warriors. Maybe warriors isn't the best word for it, but the strongest fighters that they have pretty much amongst their group. So, this one felt like a pretty interesting matchup and not one that I actually see covered too often. And I thought, these are two very hacks-based groups that would be very like fun to see, interactions with. That being said, this is probably going to be a bit of a longer video because there's a lot of characters to talk about and a lot of these guys have very complex abilities, especially some of the Bleach characters. So I've got my water here, maybe settle in, get a nice cup of hot coffee or whatever you enjoy, and get ready because we are going to be going deep into the mire. And so just so we're clear, I'm going to be doing, I guess, like a type of verse equalization, which generally does benefit Black Clover, I think, generally, especially in the context of like versus Bleach, because Bleach has the whole soul hacks. If I have more soul pressure than you, then you just die instantly. And since characters out of verse wouldn't have soul pressure or whatever, it's a pretty big disadvantage. But I think to make the fun actually fun to talk about, we should pretty much set equivalent magic and soul powers, more or less, so they should be able to interact with each other. The Magic Knights will be able to actually see the Soul Reapers, that kind of stuff. So we're going to get started with the scaling, like rough scaling. If you want like more in detail scaling, most of what I say here is pretty in line with like the general consensus on these characters. So take that as you will, you can look into it more. But just to give you the rough idea, for Bleach, the power scaling is usually early series estimated from Ichigo's fight with Ulquiorra, where Ulquiorra said something, I have the power to destroy Los Noches. Los Noches calculated to be about the size of like a small country, right? So even like this earlier form of these characters felt like, they could be small country busters. And, I think a reasonable number of like the higher end captains, especially in the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, which I should also say is the version of the captains we're going to be using, would upscale pretty drastically from Ulquiorra, with some exceptions, right? I don't know if Shunsui, like in terms of raw power, is actually upscaling Ulquiorra that hard. I think there's a lot of debate even whether or not Ulquiorra and Stark are like roughly equivalent, if Ulquiorra is really like 4 in that power ranking or if he should have been the first. Whatever it is, I think that for like the weaker characters and the captains, small country level is probably going to be about fair. And then for the higher end, and I mean high end, in this case, of course, we have characters like the Zero Division, who, when they combine their powers, or not combine their powers, just one of them was capable of using a Bankai, which could shake all of the 3 realms, that being, the Soul Society, the World of the Living, and, Wako Mundo as well, right? And, of course, the Gotei 13 is, like, somewhere below the Zero Division in terms of raw power. We don't know exactly how much below, but basically, I think that puts like an upper cap on how strong we can assume the characters to be, is like, that level of world shaking, right? I think it's probably fair to say that like shaking all of the 3 realms is probably like a world, like planet level feat, maybe like a planet plus, but probably not quite approaching solar system level, right? So there's not really much that we can say using this feat, as cool as it is. Pretty much none of the Gotei 13 are really going to scale to this, with the exception, I think, of Yamamoto, maybe Kenpachi, and I would say that's probably actually about it. So, probably a little below that world level. So I think a place to put it would be like comfortably, like maybe continental, maybe like world planet level, but definitely above small country level, and for all intents and purposes, above the output level of like the Black Clover characters, right? Now, in terms of speed, it's a little controversial, right? But I think generally we can say that Bleach characters are often impressed or overwhelmed by light speed attacks, although not like unable to react to them, right? And I think that some people put Bleach scaling at relativistic plus, but I think putting them at like just about light speed is probably more reasonable. We have captain level characters like seen reacting to Sero attacks, and other like Shimpo should be about light speed as well, etc. etc. So I think that generally the idea that Bleach speed is below light speed is probably not quite where I would put it, but I think about approximately light speed is probably fair, right? Now we can go on to the Black Clover cast and their general power scaling. And so for these guys, just to clarify, I'm going to be using the more recent Purple Orca captain and not like the old one with the weird inphasability or intangibility stuff. I just wanted to pick a more recent version of the captains because they do get more powerful throughout the series. So it made sense to use like a later roster anyway. That being said, in terms of power, Yami is probably physically the strongest of the captains. I don't think there really is much argument to it. He is able to fight on par with characters like Half Lucifero, able to block one of his punches, and Half Lucifero, of course, being able to upscale from all of the demons that came before him, who in their own right were threatening large portions of, or even the entirety of, the Clover Kingdom. And the Clover Kingdom, we have from this like scaling and the general like consensus on this to be like around the size of the continental United States. So like pretty decent country level in terms of size. Obviously not quite reaching Bleach's levels in terms of power. But generally country level is going to be where we're putting Black Clover. And now, in terms of speed, very early on in Black Clover, we have characters that are very definitively reacting to light speed attacks. And this isn't even just like a matter of, we have to assume these attacks are light speed. Yami literally says like, Leet is fighting at the speed of light. And, some of these early characters were also getting blitzed by this, but over time they eventually, upscaled. And you could see like throughout the series that the power scaling gets kind of wonky. Characters upscale like pretty massively. Yami is like not quantifiably like there's no like real number on exactly how much stronger he is at the current point in this series than he was at the beginning, but he's like undeniably way stronger, way faster. It's just the way that the story has been built. Like characters early on are getting speed blitzed by characters later on, and then they adapt and they're able to fight them. So like overall it seems like through like CAC stalking we could probably get Black Clover to be like pretty comfortably faster than light, as opposed to like just like on the verge of light speed that we have for Bleach. And then in terms of AP, it's also worth noting that there is a lot of hacks that will show up, but we'll get into that later with, of course, the hacks analysis. So generally, just to put a fine point on it, we have Bleach taking the lead in terms of pure like physical strength, damage, and tankiness in general, right? Probably going to be able to take more abuse from the Clover characters, and pretty much a lot of their attacks are going to be like one-shots if they connect with the Black Clover characters. That being said, Black Clover characters are going to be a reasonable amount faster as well, right? So take that as you will. Before, of course, I give a verdict, we're going to have to go into some more specific abilities. So first, we're going to start with the Clover captains, as I think they're probably easier to explain, although, there are definitely still a lot of nuance to these guys. So let's take a look. So rounding out what I think are like probably the three most underwhelming of the captains, not to say that they're weak in any respect, but definitely not as good as some of the higher end captains, right? We have Charlotte, Rill, and Kaiser, the captains of the don't remember the colors. Purple Orca. Nope, I don't have it. Well, anyway, Charlotte uses Briar Magic, which is basically just vines and stuff. Not really any like crazy magical properties to them. She can like wrap them around people, and that's normally how she uses it. And in the context of fighting people who are way stronger than you, that kind of like magical restraint stuff isn't really going to work because they'll probably just be able to break out of it. But still, I guess, an ability. Rill uses paint magic, which just basically allows him to use any magic type he wants. Although he's got a bit of like Arthur syndrome, for those who have read or watched Fire Force, where like to some extent his like abilities and output abilities are related to like how inspired he's feeling. So he could be a little variable. Maybe at like his absolute best, he's probably outperforming some of like the mid range captains. But in general, his abilities aren't super impressive. It's just kind of nice that he has access to all of the different like elemental magic because it means he can like mix them and create those types of combinations. But doesn't really come to be a huge factor in this fight, I don't think. And then Kaiser, despite us not knowing a lot about him, does actually have an ability that is probably going to be pretty relevant for this, which is his vortex magic, which is able to nullify magical attacks that are in its vicinity, which in a verse equalization context, I think should mean that, you know, the vortex magic would be nullifying any of the, I guess, like thrown abilities of the Gotei 13 captains, if that makes sense. So like anything that like manifests itself, I guess, like outside of the sword could be maybe absorbed, including like Bankai techniques. But that we'll probably talk about a little more when we're talking about like actual matchups. Then for the mid-range captains, we have Nozel, Fugelion, Jack the Ripper, and William Vengeance. So Nozel and Fugelion, I think, are characters who are very impressive in Black Clover, but whose kits don't really translate well to this fight specifically, mostly on account of them being very reliant on their magic just being very powerful, right? Nozel has very strong attack and defense, not too unlike Byakuya from Bleach, with his Mercury magic, but in terms of offensive ability, probably not really hurting most of the Bleach characters. In terms of defensive ability, probably not going to be able to tank attacks from many Bleach characters either. Fugelion kind of falls in the same category, although he doesn't really have defensive abilities. He's like purely offensive. So these guys would, I guess to the best of their ability, probably be filling more of a support role in the context of this fight. But they are decently coordinated with the other magicians as well, and they know their way around the speller too, right? But overall, not some of the more impressive ones. Jack the Ripper and William, however, do have abilities that are a little more relevant, even in the context of being massively overpowered by the enemy. Jack the Ripper, minor spoiler for the manga, if you haven't read, skip forward a few seconds. Jack the Ripper has the ability to like cut through conceptual things, or pretty much cut through whatever he wants, but also like in addition to conceptual stuff. Like we see him cutting through space magic, time magic, I believe as well. And overall, like when he's really trying his best, there's nothing he can't cut, right? And we see that in the manga as well. So that is going to be an ability that probably we can consider ignores conventional durability. If you're able to cut through concepts, you're probably going to be able to cut through somebody's planet level as well. William Vengeance doesn't have the same output level or anything like that, but he does have his world tree magic, which allows him to summon a giant tree, which along with like being able to control it, like I guess wood, just controlling the wood, he can also use it to drain the mana of his opponents, which in this context would probably be spiritual pressure. So it's kind of like an AoE ability that slowly drains the abilities of the enemies. So it's something that they have to deal with quickly, or overall, like over time, they're going to lose the fight. Then for who I consider to be the top three, and I will be giving the captains Julius as well, if that wasn't clear earlier. I don't think I explicitly said it. But we have Yami, Dorothy, and Julius. Yami is a pretty crazy combatant when it comes to these types of versus battles. I've talked about him on this channel before, but basically his main claim to fame is he has like a durability negation attack in his Dimension Slash. He has Hacks negation with his Black Hole technique, which he can also cast over like a large area and fight in, which, absorbs the techniques, even conceptual ones like gravity, of his opponents that are using it in that area. In addition to that, he's also like physically one of the strongest of the captains, and also one of the fastest. So that really like puts him head and shoulders above pretty much everybody else. And in terms of like what he's able to do this fight, like, if somebody's getting hit by a Dimension Slash, they're going to die. Like there's really no if or buts about it, unless they have like, well, like with the exception of characters that have like particular hacks in terms of regeneration, like Aizen would probably be able to live at Yuha, but like, the captains don't really have any of that going for them. Dorothy has really overpowered magic as well in the form of her dream magic, where she's able to transport other people into her realm. And basically within her realm, her powers function a lot like Gremmy from Bleach, if you're familiar with him, where anything she thinks becomes reality. and she's pretty much able to rewrite the rules of the dream world. Although it's worth saying she does have to be like within proximity of her opponent to actually put them in the dream world, but with her speed and the fact that it's not like just be like she has to be pretty much next to them. So that much might be a little difficult, but for the most part, a character who's caught in Dorothy's thing is going to have like a lot of trouble breaking out unless they have some sort of like super dimension / attack like Yami did in that captain fight. Julius Novachrono has time magic, which basically means, if he uses it, he can slow things down, speed things up, completely freeze things. He can even use it on himself, which we see him using. Very overpowered, and on top of that, he's like an incredibly fast character. So he is, for a very good reason, pretty much the top of the verse of Black Clover, at least until we get to later arcs. Now, for the Gotei 13, we have, on the bottom rank, we have Komamoro, Rose, Kensei, Soifon, and Ukitake. Now, some of these guys in their own right do have pretty ridiculous abilities, which we'll have to explore, but for the most part, I'm going to just try my best to summarize their Shikai when relevant, and more importantly, their Bankai, to the best of my abilities. And remember, this is as of Thousand Year Blood War. Ukitake, don't really know his Bankai, but we do know his Shikai is the ability to basically absorb and redirect attacks, presumably like energy-based attacks, because we only see him doing it with Sero from Stark. But, we don't really know much about Ukitake aside from that. He is pretty sick as well, which means, maybe not among the strongest in terms of like physical ability or like drawn out fights, but he is narratively, it feels like he's one of the stronger captains, at least early in the series, but by Thousand Year Blood War, it's hard to really hold him to that same level. Soifon is the captain of the Stealth Division, which means she excels in stealth, and her Shikai ability really lines well with that, where if she touches somebody in the same place twice with her Shikai, they instantly die. Instant death is a pretty hard thing to defend against, so, that's pretty cool. That being said, she has at a bit of a disadvantage in this fight because one of the main things she relies on is speed, and speed is something that she does not have over the Black Clover captains. That being said, she still has stealth, and if they're, like, a little negligent of Soifon and not really paying attention to where she is in the battlefield, then there's a good chance that she could, pick up some easy knockouts using her Shikai ability. Her Bankai doesn't really work super well in like a clustered team fight setting. It's just a giant nuclear bomb. Well, not like quite a nuke, but a giant bazooka that she launches. Kensei has a much more, underwhelming Bankai compared to the other captains. Although it's funny that his Bankai is called Tekken Tajikaze, because I do think that those are probably two of the most like, how do you explain it? Like Japanese sounding words. Like I would imagine that if somebody has no experience with, like somebody who doesn't know Japanese, like me, were to just like have to pick the name of a Bankai, Tekken Tachikaze is something that could come out of it, for obvious reasons. That being said, Kensei's Bankai ability is basically like he gets like armor that goes over his arms and shoulders, and he just gets like a power buff from it, so he just gets a little stronger. Rose's Bankai is pretty cool. It is like an auditory version, sort of Aizen's Bankai, but not exactly. Aizen's Shikai. But basically, Rose creates illusions using sound, I guess. And the illusions are so realistic that they can cause physical damage to the person who is being hit by them. Really means they're not exactly illusions, right? But he's able to like create fire, ice, that kind of manipulation with it. And we know that it works based on audio because of his conversation with Mask Demasculine and the way the fight turned out afterwards as well. Now, Komamura is another one whose Bankai is relatively underwhelming. Creates a giant suit of armor that like reflects and replicates his movements. Any damage done to him is done to the armor and vice versa. That's about it. Now, for the more mid-tier captains, we have Mayuri, Toshiro, Byakuya, and Shinji. Mayuri's Bankai, Konjiki, Ashisogi, Drizo is, a very weird one to quantify in terms of like how it would perform in a fight in general, because it's like very adaptable and it's kind of its claim to fame, right? Like Mayuri never really fights the same way twice. He always has like these crazy abilities that he pulls out of nowhere. But basically, the way his Bankai works is he has a giant baby thing that emits poison, and also after his modification, he can like kind of rewrite its genetics on the fly. I guess is probably the best way to describe it. So like he's able to modify the way it comes out and the way that it operates to like some limited degree. Toshiro Hitsugaya has his Bankai ability Daiguren Hyorin Maru, which is basically just an ice-based ability. He gets wings. He can effectively control the water in the atmosphere to freeze it over. But that's kind of the limitation of it. Also, for what it's worth, I'm using, not only am I using Thousand Year Blood War, but I'm also using like where the anime currently is Thousand Year Blood War, if that makes sense. Hopefully that doesn't make a huge difference, but I personally am waiting for it to be animated. I think a lot of people are as well. So, I didn't want to get into manga spoiler territories with this fight. That being said, now we can move on to Byakuya. His Senbon Zakura is like pretty much the best. Sorry, not the best, but like it's a good offensive and defensive tool. Basically, it creates a bunch of little petals that act as swords. So if you touch the petal, you get cut like you got cut by a sword. And his Bankai allows him to surround himself by like a bunch of these petals. And he can also generally control the direction that they go as well. Pretty cool power, pretty like hard to deal with for a lot of people unless they have like strong AoE or good ranged attacks. Shinji's abilities, really it's his Shikai that's going to be the most important because he can target people with it, where he just inverts their senses and makes them like all confused. Back becomes forward, up becomes down, etc., etc. His Bankai switches the perception of ally and foe for everybody in the vicinity. So I don't think that his Bankai is something he's really going to be using in a team fight, because, for obvious reasons, that probably wouldn't go too well. Now, for the top tier of the Bleach captains, we have Unohana, Kyoraku, Zaraki, and Yamamoto. Going, I guess, from right to left here, we'll start with Unohana. Her Bankai, I don't believe we know exactly how it works, but it's some sort of blood healing type ability. That's really the extent that we know. Basically, Unohana is a really good healer. That's going to be her main claim to fame in this fight as well. She's going to be like very capable of healing gravely injured people, which we can also see hints of in her fight with Zaraki, right? So she's going to be like a very good support piece. Kyoraku, his Shikai allows him to turn children's games into reality. There's quite a few, but just to go over a few of them, one of them he can spin like a top and send like tornadoes at people. Not really one of the more impressive ones. The other one, he's able to travel on people's shadows, which is a good way for him to be able to surprise people. And then he also has the ability to play that color game where he can call a color, and then if he damages his opponent on that color, he effectively gets a bonus damage for it. And the more of that color that he wears, the more damage the opponent takes. Pretty much sums up the most important ones, I believe. Then his Bankai is probably also not going to come into great effect here because it has a huge AoE and he does not like to use it in team battles. Kenpachi Zaraki, we have not seen his Bankai as of now in the anime. I know that we probably know what it is in the manga, but I don't want to, go into that territory. So we'll just talk about what we've seen from him. And to be honest, he's just a stat monster. We have seen his Shikai, and it basically just is like a giant axe, which may or may not allow him to cut through conceptual things, but either way, he's able to cut through concepts, which you see in his like fight with Gremmy, and he's just like overwhelmingly a brute, and he has a very like direct, straightforward way of fighting. It's really it for Kenpachi. And then Yamamoto has the most probably elaborate set of abilities in terms of this fight. At least with Kyoraku, I didn't have to really highlight his Bankai, but Yamato, I think I have to. So his Shikai basically allows him to control flames. That one's pretty simple. His Bankai comes in 4 different forms. There's a north, a south, an east, a west. Let me see if I can remember the exaction of this. I think south allows him to resurrect the souls of people he's killed with his Bankai and use them to attack. They're just like generic zombies, so they kind of just overwhelm. They're not like particularly strong. I believe, okay, I'm not 100% sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe east is his like ability to create like defensive barriers made of flames, which can either be visible or invisible to his opponents. And then the west was his ability to compress his flames into his sword, such that anything he touches with his sword becomes instantly vaporized because of the heat. And then his north is the ability to create like a giant slash of flame, which, is pretty much a one shot, at least in the context of Bleach. And of course, the Black Clover characters. None of them are tanking an attack from Yamamoto and living. Okay? So that was a lot of explanation. I'm going to take a quick sip of my water, and we will get into the Black Clover captains versus the Bleach captains. So right away, just to make sure we establish here, like, who the important threats and what the important interactions are going to be, I can say pretty confidently that Charlotte, Nozel, and Fugelion are going to be playing very supportive roles in this fight. They do not have the damage output nor the strength to really be super relevant. They do have the speed, but the speed doesn't really mean much if you're not going to be able to hurt people. That being said, they can cover for any weaknesses of their allies and, kind of serve as, fodder, but like support for them as well. Although, in terms of their support abilities, they don't really have much. It's not like they have any like elaborate healing or anything. Heck, Fugelion literally just has fire, so, not really much you can do aside from, I guess, provide the ability to fly for some people. I'm not really sure. Getting into more of it, Rill has a little bit more versatility, but again, with his magic, he's kind of limited in terms of what he can do, because it's mostly like an offensive, not very hacks-based ability. Jack the Ripper, on the other hand, will probably be able to hurt any captain that he catches with his blade, again, because he's able to cut through concepts when he's, like, really pushing himself. So he does have, like, that same, like, dimension / level of, insane hacks negation. Kaiser and William have, two pretty respectively interesting and helpful abilities. Vortex Magic able to nullify abilities, which is going to be helpful against some of the Bankai and Shikai as well. And the World Tree Magic, of course, acting as like a timer for the Gotei 13. Like, you have to win in a certain amount of time or they'll run out of spiritual pressure and just lose. Yami, Dorothy, and Julius are, of course, going to be the most important and like highest like level and probably the best chance that the Black Clover cast has of winning, because they not only have, that and create incredible hacks to be able to hurt people, but they also, like all the other Black Clover characters, have the speed to really overwhelm a lot of the Bleach cast. That being said, now I want to go through each of the Bleach captains, which again is going to be 13, so we're going to be here for quite a while. But I'm going to go through each of them, talk about kind of how they would interact in fights with the Black Clover captains, talk about whether or not, the Black Clover captains have a win condition against them, and then, kind of just like give a bit of a summarization, and then we'll tie it all together at the end. Sound good? So first we have Komamoro and Kensei. These two are very brutish, very reliant on like physical strength, which in a fight against people who have incredible hack-based abilities will not normally turn out pretty well for them, right? A Dimension Slash is going to kill either of them. Julius would be able to outspeed and kind of like freeze either of them. Even Jack would probably be able to cut through either of them. And then Vengeance, of course, can drain them over time, but probably won't even need to get to that because they're probably getting fodderized pretty quickly. Ukitake is unfortunately, relatively weak in terms of his abilities and whatnot. He's sick. We don't really see him do much, so it's really hard to quantify him, but I can't imagine he's very much better than the captains before him. Rose is a very interesting character to talk about because he has probably one of the best Bankai abilities among the captains, but he's also like such a, frankly an idiot in terms of using it. Like, I get it. Being an anime character, you really do enjoy like explaining people how your abilities work, and it's pretty cool when you do it too. When Aizen does it, it's absolutely awesome because there's nothing the opponent can do. But when your Bankai has like a very specific condition that it works under, in Rose's case, it needs to be able to, the opponent needs to be able to hear it for it to create the illusion, which is why Maskedly Masculine is able to fight against him because he just punches his ear holes out and then, just beats him up all hands, right? So in a fight like this where Rose doesn't show off and explain how his powers work, there's like a non-zero chance that it really like ends up hurting the Black Clover cast. They have like decent battle IQ, so maybe they'll be able to figure it out. But if Rose in character does do his little soy explain how my ability work type bit, I do think that there are characters in Black Clover who are crazy enough namely Yami and Jack the Ripper, to punch holes in their ears if it means winning a fight. But even outside of that, Dorothy should be able to deal with him as well by using her dream magic. If she catches him in the dream realm, she can change the rules of how sound works so she can't hear, or even just make herself earmuffs. Kaiser is going to be able to nullify that ability with his vortex. It's reasonable to assume that his vortex can also nullify sound and stuff. Like anything that comes from like a power in this verse equalization should be able to be nullified. And then of course Julius can probably just literally stop the sound from traveling as well with his time magic. So overall, a few different ways that they have to deal with Rose. Soifon actually does pose a bit of a threat despite her not being one of the physical threats on the team. Just given that with her speed that she overly relies on, she is at a bit of a disadvantage because she is just generally slower than the other captains. And to the extent that I actually think that Fugelion, Noelle, or Charlotte might have a chance of beating Soifon, because Soifon again depends a lot on her stealth. And then outside that, she also uses her Bankai, but in a team fight setting, probably doesn't want to be setting that off. So she is at a pretty big disadvantage. It probably doesn't have the AP to really contend with some of the I would imagine in terms of AP, she's on the lowest scale of the captains, and I don't think that's a hard argument to make. Now, Hitsugaya is probably one of my least favorite captains. I really just hate everything about him, but I will try my best to be charitable. His ability is pretty strong, undeniably being able to freeze the air. That being said, we don't actually ever see him really do much with it in the series, at least as of now. So there's even though we know very well how it works, we never see him do anything super creative with it aside from turning his getting the ice wings and then shooting blasts of ice from his sword and whatnot. To be honest, with characters who are faster than him, I don't anticipate him being a huge problem. And then for the same reasons, Dorothy can absorb him, or Kaiser can nullify the ice, or Yami and Jack could just one-shot him. It's pretty hard to convince me that Hitsugaya is going to be super relevant in this fight. Shinji does have a pretty big claim here with his Shikai, right? Definitely can't be using his Bankai in a team fight setting, but with his Shikai, that's a really, I think, big problem for the Black Clover cast, especially if Shinji doesn't, of course, do the silly boy thing of explaining how his Shikai works, right? If he explains how his Shikai works, or even that it's active, Yami can instantly put up his Black Moon and nullify the effects of it, right? We see Yami able to even nullify the effects of gravity magic within his Black Moon field, so there's no reason any other sort of conceptual ability shouldn't be nullifiable, right? So as soon as anybody is made aware of Shinji's ability, it can be pretty easily counteracted with either Yami or Dorothy. But that being said, if he plays it smart, doesn't tell people how his ability works, even if his ability can only work on one person at a time, which I do get the impression that it does only work on one person at a time, that's pretty difficult. And if he picks his targets early well and gets Yami and Dorothy out of the fight, gonna be pretty hard for the Black Clover characters to win. So Shinji, I think, is despite him not being physically one of the stronger ones, an S tier level threat for the Black Clover captains. And now we have Byakuya. Again, we talked about him a bit, ultimate attack, ultimate defense with his silly little blades. But of course, against ability nullification or damage, ranged attacks that can slice through anything, time manipulation, or the ability to pop him into a dream world, it's not that impressive. It's just not quite enough. Mayuri is really hard to talk about because we don't really know the extent of what his Bankai modifications can be, right? I get the impression that, he's probably gonna, again, get fodderized pretty well by characters like Yami, Jack, and Julius. But there might be a case to be made that Dorothy would probably have a tough time fighting against him, where maybe she brings him to the dream realm, she explains something, this is my dream magic, and here everything I think of is reality, and then Mayuri has some sort of anti-dream medicine or something. I don't know. It's really hard to talk about Mayuri because he can do so much, and so much of what he does is so weird. So headcanon your way into thinking Mayuri maybe even just clutches this fight if you want to. I don't think there's enough precedent for it. And I don't think he's a super big factor in this fight. Unohana, on the other hand, her main claim is going to be that she can really heal people. So, and also having a super big healing ability against characters who are a whole weight class lower than you in terms of power output is usually a pretty big deal. But again, Jack and Yami do possess one-shot techniques, so they don't have a zero chance of being able to kill Unohana. Same with Dorothy and Julius, where their abilities are very hacks based. But outside of these four, none of the Black Clover captains are touching Unohana, as well as most of the characters. You know, you could see as we've been going through, these four have been doing some pretty heavy lifting. Kyoraku, again, can't use his Bankai, and if his Shikai can be nullified by, like, the Vortex magic or the Black Moon magic, then, you know, that's pretty bad for Shinsui. He's not physically one of the strongest captains, so if his abilities are being nullified, or his Shikai abilities are being nullified on top of that, then, you know, not really much he's doing, aside from, of course, getting one shot. Now, Kenpachi, again, going to be a little controversial, and I also don't know what his Bankai is yet, but an interesting interaction that could happen would be Dorothy and Kenpachi fighting, where Dorothy's Dream Realm kind of operates a lot like Gremmy's Visionary, and to be honest, could imagine Kenpachi winning against Dorothy in a similar way to how he beats Gremmy, where he just, like, kind of overwhelms and then even, like, scares Gremmy, or in this case Dorothy, into just losing the fight. Alternatively, he was able to cut through space when he was fighting against Gremmy, so he might be able to do, like, a Yami dimension slash kind of thing where he cuts through the dreamscape. That being said, and this is going to be a hot take, but I actually think Kenpachi is maybe the least threatening of the captains in this fight, for the sole reason that he is not the type to dodge an attack. And if you don't dodge, like, a dimension slash that's going for your head, you're gonna die. Like, it doesn't matter, like, how strong you are, the dimension slash literally ignores hacks. And Kenpachi is totally the kind of guy to just stand there and take it. That's my logic. Disagree with it if you want to. But I think Kenpachi is getting smoked in this fight. Now, onto Yamamoto, who is maybe one of the biggest problems because he has a huge AoE effect. And to be honest, we don't actually know exactly how this AoE effect is going to interact with the captains. Like, you may be able to say, like, you know, maybe Yamato just activates his Bankai East, or whichever the one with the sword tip is. He makes it super hot. And even though Bleach characters are like they think, like, oh, wow, this is really hot, but they're, like, able to resist it. Like, maybe it's literally just too hot for the Black Clover characters to handle, with the exception, I guess, of Fugelion. It's a weird thing to imagine, but even in that situation, Yami could just use his black hole and just kind of, like, instantly nullify the heat. Imagine there's something like Julius could do with his time. We see him using his time ability over a crazy big area when he protects the whole Clover Kingdom against Leet's light-based attack. And alternatively, if Yamamoto does prove to be, like, a bit of a problem in terms of his Shikai not being able to get too close or being scared of, like, trying to close the distance to finish him, whatever it is, like, Dorothy would be able to just take any, like, one problematic character just straight out of the fight and deal with them in her Dream Realm. Like, I actually think Dorothy is maybe one of the most underrated characters when it comes to, like, versus battles, because I think, like, for the most part, if she's faster than a character, and against the Bleach characters she definitely is, she can cause some serious problems for them, where she's just, like, blipping people into her Dream Realm, beating them, and then, like, going on to the next one, you know? And kind of just farming wins that way. So that being said, I'm going to just take a look at all the characters holistically, go through, and then I'll give you my rough summary on who I think is going to win. Okay? And feel free to follow my cursor here. I do think that Charlotte, Rill, Fugelion, and Nozel, I think, are probably not really relevant combatants in this fight. As soon as the fight starts, William Vongen can use his World Tree and kind of put the Gotei 13 on a timer, which will be nice. And then as the fight progresses, it'll basically be following the formula of Julius, Yami, Jack the Ripper, and Dorothy are going to be running around messing with people using their hacks. The only real win conditions they have are these four. Whether it's killing them with one of the dimension slashes, or Dorothy trapping somebody in her dream magic realm and using that to kill them, or Julius very, like, plausibly, like, speeding up somebody's life and making them super old, or, like, reverting them backwards to when they were a baby, or just freezing them long enough for one of the high AP characters to kill them. That would be the general win condition. For the Bleach cast, I do think that the strongest argument for the win condition here would be Rose, Shinji, and Yamamoto. Mostly because their Bankai are not going to be, like, super easy for the Black Clover cast to deal with. at least compared to the other captains, right? But, you know, if Rose says his whole shenanigan, as soon as they realize that an ability is being used, Yami can default to using his black hole technique, sorry, dark moon technique, or Dorothy can, you know, just go up to them real close and blip them out of the fight, right? And as soon as any of that happens, like that ability is nullified because, you know, she can literally rewrite the rules of the realm that she's in. So that being said, I think primarily because of these four, I would probably give the overall win to the Black Clover characters. Again, speed advantage is pretty big in fights, and if you have the strength advantage, that's usually a pretty big deal. But in a fight where like the characters are hacks based and two of them literally have a durability negation, that's not really quite enough, if that makes sense. And while Bleach generally has some of the best hacks, looking well, like when I was researching and thinking about this, like the actual Gotei 13 captains, with the exception of maybe Shunsui, don't actually have hacks as crazy as some of the other characters throughout the series, right? And Shunsui, unfortunately, is very limited because he can't really use his Bankai when he has allies around, right? So that being said, I would probably give the win to the Black Clover captains, but I think I can hear a very good argument for that not being the case, especially if you think Yamamoto literally just like incinerates all of them as soon as he activates a Shikai, or Bankai, sorry. But, you know, if you guys disagree, let me know what you think. Very happy to check it out. Again, always, please, if you have disagreements, come join the Discord. Come talk to me there. It's going to be a very fun time. I think I'm usually much better at engaging with people who come to the Discord than I am with, like, looking at YouTube replies. That being said, you know, if you're watching this, hope you guys have been enjoying a great holiday season. Appreciate any support you could give. Subscribe, like, comment, whatever it is. And I honestly hope you guys have a good rest of your holiday. And, yeah, have a good one.